Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, spring break is over. It wasn't much of a spring break for either of us, but the Buckeyes got some time to rest and relax, and now we're all back, ready to work, ready to talk a little more spring football.
First day in pads. We talked to Ryan Day after practice, so that was good. Finally getting to see a little bit of, I don't know if hitting has yet begun, but once the pads get on, how can you avoid?
Mm-hmm.
It's like when you buy a kid a helmet. How can you avoid the kid running into a wall? He's got to test it out, stuff like that. So lots of, I'm sure, wall collisions, things of that going on. But welcome to all of you joining us. But yeah, so we got to talk to Ryan Day after practice today. What was the main thing we learned today, Tom, is that it's still early.
I think the main thing that we learned today is that it's still early, just the first day in pads, hasn't gotten a chance to watch the film yet. All of the things we usually learn from the third practice of the spring. This is, the third practice is like every once in a while there will be some kind of player movement after the first week. It's usually, a new guy who's maybe picked things up a little quicker than others, but doesn't feel like that was really the case today. It was kind of more, all right, there was a lot of quarterback talk because it is Ryan Day. There is a quarterback battle. There was a lot of quarterback talk today. It feels like in a lot of cases we may know more after the scrimmage on Saturday. Right now it's kind of, okay, now they're in pads for the first time and now you're getting ready to take that next step.
Yeah, and as far as the quarterbacks, he did say, they're doing fine. He's excited, but is looking forward to seeing what they look like in the scrimmage when they're not quite live, but they're still having to avoid trouble and seeing how they move the ball, how they take care of the ball, just how they progress down the field. And they still have to figure out what kind of situations they're going to put them in because they're still putting in packages like third down, goal line. They don't have that stuff in yet. So you have to work your scrimmage around what you've got in that you can call, which then gets us to Brian Hartline, and they still have to figure out, he'll call some plays, but they've got to put together a game plan, and it's going to be a vanilla game plan based on what they have not put in and what they're going to put in. So maybe vanilla and one crazy play, just for fun, just a flea flicker of some sort.
Yeah, I think they'll probably keep it fairly generic and just sort of situational on Saturday. I'm expecting much more situations rather than like a true spring game type of practice or whatever. It feels like this is going to be much more just, okay, we're going to run a bunch of stuff on 1st and 10 and we're going to run a bunch of stuff on 2nd and 7 and we're going to run, and we're just going to run those plays over and over and over again, and it'll be, we have 15 plays for these different situations and you'll run a bunch of them, but it's just going to be sort of situational, maybe more than a true back and forth spring game. We've seen spring games that were kind of like that in the past. Feels like that's probably going to be what it is on Saturday, which, that's fine, especially this early in the spring.
Yeah, this will be the first scrimmage, then they'll have another on the 1st, and then, of course, they end on the 15th with the spring game. One of the first questions he was asked about was what's going on at center, and he said, Carson Hinsman is doing well there. Vic Cutler is still learning the offense, which I don't think people think too much about. He's transferring in, he's going to come in and start right away. But of course, as we have said previously, all of the transfers are kind of starting out as backups, and then they work their way in. And I don't know, maybe no position more difficult to do that than center, where you're learning the offense, you're learning the calls, you played left tackle last year, like you're learning, relearning the center position that Vic Cutler played 2 years ago. A little bit, like 4 or 5 games. So there's a lot going in and a lot riding on him. They went out and got him to play center, but doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be the starting center. But right now, obviously, very early. But the good news out of all of this is they seem to be okay with Carson Hinsman at this point.
Right. It feels like they are not worried yet about anything, which, you asked Ryan Day about the risks of being too optimistic on the offensive line and just sort of assuming everything's going to work out. And then, I think he's cognizant of that and not, going to try to not be too high or too low on anything, especially this early in the spring. But, at this point of the year, if you're just at a point where you're not looking at and this is going to be like a quadruple negative, and I will apologize in advance. If you're not looking at things and going, this is definitely not going to work. Like there's no chance this will work. That's probably okay this time of year because you've got You're 3 practices down. You got 12 more to go in the spring, and then you got all the summer and fall camp and all this kind of stuff. So at this point, you're just trying to, you're kind of like ruling some things out. Like this is like, Tony Gerdeman is our starting left tackle. No, that is definitely not going to work, and it's just because of eligibility, not because of any other reason. But this is definitely not going to work. Carson Hinzman seems like he is at least in the still a plausible option bucket, which is good. That's really all you're looking for at this point because this is, he talked about how practice 1 and practice 2, which is all they've gotten a chance to really like go look at and break down. Without being in pads, there's a bunch of stuff you can't do in pads, and I'm sure everyone's thinking, tackle the running backs, hit the wide receivers. You as an offensive lineman, if you're banging in the trenches, like you don't want guys banging in the trenches without pads on. That's how you start getting dings and bangs and bruises that end up just sort of spiraling all spring. So they've been very limited in what they can do in the trenches. So in terms of evaluation of the offensive linemen, it's real early. Now we're going to get a chance to talk to the offensive and defensive linemen on Thursday after we've had, at that point they've had a couple practices. The coaches have had a chance to evaluate some of the film from Tuesday.
Still too early to tell, though. We're going to get a lot of that.
We are still going to get a lot of that, but it'll be interesting to see, what they can say, what the adjustment has been like. Carson Hinzman, for example, a year ago, true freshman coming in, head is swimming, completely overwhelmed, probably not physically ready for the demands of a Big Ten. Now it's your second year. Now I think we're going to have a lot to learn from him. If we get a chance to talk to Vic Cutler, it'll be very interesting to hear the differences of, Ryan Day talked about, you got to get used to being Ohio State football practice, because he's played FBS football before. He played at Louisiana Monroe. I mean, I'm not being rude here. I can read the I can read the SP Plus rankings or the standings or the scores or whatever. That is a different level of FBS football than what you're playing at Ohio State. And Ryan Day said as much. I mean, you got to get used to practicing the Ohio State way. So that's going to be interesting to hear from him on what that adjustment's been like and all that.
Yeah, and so go ahead and throw some questions at us if you want. That's what we're here for. That's why we're live. We don't want to have to do the entire show ourselves. We would appreciate some input. But Ryan was also asked about the offensive tackles, and he's like, it's too early. We'll know more later this week. You get to see some film from today, see how they work on Thursday, and then, of course, the scrimmage on Saturday will give them a much better idea of what's going on, especially at right tackle with Tager Shabola and Zen Mahalski. He was asked who is standing out in the secondary, and the good news there is
he named 4 cornerbacks.
Yeah, and he's not the only person to name these corners. Like Jim Knowles has, obviously, as well. And so you continue to hear like all 4 of them, Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, Jair Brown, who today Jim Knowles tweeted out that he was the silver bullet of the day. Probably, I don't know if it was from today, because it was immediately after practice, which seemed a little odd.
Well, and we were sitting in the team room, so I can tell you that picture was not tweeted out live, because I did not see Jair Brown at the front of the. So there was probably a pre-practice meeting, would be my guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, Jair Brown named the silver bullet of the day, which is just sort of generally, it's a recognition of someone who's kind of doing, making progress, doing things the right way. And
it's another thing to take note of.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same way we look at when people lose black stripes. When you see that, it's like, okay, that's good. Ian Martz wants to know what time is practice. I think they started around 9 o'clock this morning.
I think so.
We were originally supposed to be talking to Ryan Day around 10:30 or so, and then they slid it back half an hour today. So I think it went from like an 8:30 practice to about a 9 o'clock practice.
So I think the first 2 practices started at 8:30, if I remember being here for those. So yeah. Starting at 9, and then Saturdays is probably going to be later than that because it'll be the scrimmage. But so that's the usual daily thing here, or Tuesday, Thursday. Now, then they'll move to like maybe a Monday, Wednesday. There's some Mondays and Wednesday practices in there as well, as things get a little bit wonky. But again, the corners, I think that's a positive. And again, Davison Igbinosun was mentioned as well, as he has been. So those 4 guys. I think they need 3. If you've got 4 who play as starters, play as well as starters, and they're already standing out, now they're not facing maybe the best receivers at this point. They're facing a lot of freshmen and redshirt freshmen, but I still think this is a positive too. You continue to have guys who are aggressive and they're playing well and they're not getting beaten, and you know, I think this is a win for the defense rather than a loss for the offense.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the alternative. The alternative is they're playing against young receivers
No,
and they're
Tom,
not looking
let's
good.
not.
So this is one of these, you can't. This is like you can't win the national championship in the spring, but you can lose it. Well, they're not losing it. If you have corners who are going against a younger group of wide receivers, and they're looking good, okay, congratulations. You didn't win the national championship, but you probably didn't also lose the national championship during week 1 of spring football. So that's, as far as things go at this time of year, that's a positive. And you kind of want to get what you'd expect, because this is the time of year when everything is like a net zero. Everything is a zero-sum game. Every long completion against, for the offense is a long completion given up by the defense. So you kind of, this time of year, just want to see what you're expecting to see and hear what you're expecting to hear. And it feels like this is what you'd sort of expect to hear this time of year, that a defensive back room where you've heard positive things about Denzel Burke, where you've heard positive things about Jordan Hancock, you've heard positive things about Davison Igbinosun, you've heard positive things about Jair Brown. That's what you would expect this time of year. These are guys who had, solid-ish years or years to build on last year, and now you're hearing the things that would indicate, okay, they are taking the next step.
Yeah, I just had a question about any discernible notice in the tempo of practice, the differences in the tempo from last year to this year. And I don't know that the tempo is not the difference. It's the competitive nature, where they begin with some winner and loser stuff. That's something I wrote about after the very first practice. And it sounds like some of that is coming from the defensive side of the ball, where the defense now knows the defense. And Jim Knowles said he wanted to go more competitive rather than teaching this spring. And so I wonder, and I was going to ask Ryan Day this, but you only have so many questions. So was this a move did you need more competition? And this is something I can ask him later on, but did you need more competition, or was this just the defense is doing it, so let's just do it as a team, that sort of thing. So that's really the main difference, and it's something that has been around before. It kind of went away for a little while, and they seem to be bringing it back, starting off with and not just starting off, but going through practice with as much winner loser stuff as they can do, and still teach and still get their fundamentals in. And it reminded me of something we saw at the Peach Bowl when we watched Georgia's practice, where one of the first things they're warming up, and it's like, find somebody next to you and beat them in this warm up.
Yeah, and that was a really interesting practice to watch. And I think my sense from kind of hearing from some of the Georgia folks afterwards is that is not necessarily what they normally do at practice. It was a little bit of a, just sort of break the monotony kind of thing, but it was pretty intense to watch, pretty intriguing to watch. And this always kind of takes me, winner loser period always takes me back to the Urban Meyer era, where that always felt like a much more Urban Meyer thing than a Ryan Day thing. And I mean, how deeply do we want to psychoanalyze things? Is this Ryan Day recognizing that perhaps the intensity level needs to be increased to get back to the level that they were at during the Urban Meyer period? Sure, you can read into that whatever you want to read into that. Is that just, this is a team that that is ready for that a little earlier this year? You can read that into it. I mean, you can kind of read whatever you want into it. And honestly, the answer might be some combination of all of the above plus some other stuff.
Yeah, it's spring. Let's try it. Also, the very next day we saw Georgia doing what?
Yoga.
Exactly.
Yes. Was Kirby Smart just messing with us? Yes. Follow-up question. Also, yes. Yeah, that was one of those. The first one, it was kind of like, wow, because we have no basis. We know what Ohio State football practice looks like. We have no basis for what Georgia football practice looks like, and Georgia reporters never ever get into Georgia practice, it sounds like. So it was kind of the Georgia reporters knew that they were doing yoga on the second day, because they always do yoga on the last period of practice on whatever day that was, or Thursday or whatever. So yes, that was definitely Kirby Smart messing with the media, because Kirby Smart doesn't like the media, because Kirby Smart doesn't want the media in practice at all, and the bowl makes him. So he's like, fine, you want it? Here you go.
Some yoga.
Enjoy some yoga. Yes.
We've had some questions.
We have had some questions. There was one from Todd Gump about Davison Igbinosun. Is he going to start at some point this season? I certainly think that's possible, and I think that's possible even if everyone's healthy.
Yeah.
And is he in the top 3 that they have a 3 cornerback rotation if everyone's healthy? Yeah, I think that's possible. Does he win a starting job and someone else is the third cornerback in the rotation. I think that's possible. If they go through cornerbacks at the rate that they went through cornerbacks last year, everyone's probably going to start this year. So, but I think he has something with the length that he has. I think that's a unique enough skill set. You know, Ryan Day talked a little bit about sort of the extraordinary traits of the quarterbacks in terms of evaluating those. I think Davis Igbinosun being a couple inches taller than some of the other guys, maybe that becomes an extraordinary trait that gets him on the field a little earlier.
Yeah, and he's an aggressive guy, and as Jim Knowles said, he's got kind of a Jersey attitude to him, which I tend to think is a terrible thing. Tom, you people on the East Coast seem to think it's okay, but at this point, those four, I think you'd be selling. I think most people would say, you know, Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, and Davis Igbinosun as the top three, but I think you're selling Jair Brown short, and I think he's been underestimated for most of his career and has continued to surprise people because he's playing as well as he does, and people are selling him short. So I don't even want to put a top, you know, who are the top three out there. I think it's a top four.
Yeah.
And you go from there.
Yeah, and those are the four guys who are repping with the ones and the twos 2 weeks ago when we got to watch practice a couple times, and those are the four names that Ryan Day said. So it does feel like there is kind of a top four right now, and then, you know, Ryan Turner and Jermaine Matthews and those other guys are kind of working their way up.
Yeah, and as we've seen the top two, it's the two practices that we got to see. It was Denzel Burke and Jordan Hancock.
It's just me. Tim asked, do they not just go back to a 4-3, just a 4-3-4 look instead of the 4-2-5 they've been running under Knowles? It feels like football is kind of trending away from that, from the 4-3-4 kind of look, in terms of defending against more spread offenses, more three wide receiver offenses. You want that extra defensive back out there. The general trend has been everyone is going faster and lighter, and you're seeing safeties become linebackers become, you know, rush ends. That's just sort of the direction that football's trending in general. And if you look at their schedule this year, they don't have a bunch of the really heavy run heavy teams that you maybe saw last year. You know, Wisconsin, and you even look at some of those teams.
You don't know what Wisconsin's going to be.
Iowa is Iowa, so they're not on the schedule this year, so it doesn't matter, but Iowa's Iowa. Wisconsin just hired Phil Longo, who is an up-tempo, you know, he was at North Carolina before. They may have a very different look than what you're used to. Notre Dame just hired a new offensive coordinator. They may have a little bit of a different, and they also have a quarterback in Sam Hartman who's maybe a little bit more, you know, capable of throwing the football down the field to a receiver, shall we say, than some of the quarterback options they had last year. So you're already having a less run-heavy, you know, traditional offense-heavy, quote-unquote, offense schedule this year. And, you know, football's trending that direction everywhere. So I think, you know, get used to the 4-2-5. And, you know, if anything, you might, instead of seeing a 4-3, at some point you might see a 3-3-5 at some point. That would be a major philosophical shift for Ohio State, but I would say you're more likely to see it shift that direction rather than go back to a 4-3.
Yeah, and that 3-3-5 is one of those threes is a jack in the middle there. You know, so that I think you'll see that. I think we saw it last year as well. But the interesting thing is you have all of these different hybrid players, offensively and defensively. So it's tough to be you are this, because even looking at Georgia last year, where everybody's like, oh, they're a run-heavy team, then we watch them, and it's like they throw the ball all over the place out of the 12 personnel, and they have the ability to have one of their tight ends, Darnell Washington, be a tight end, or be a left tackle, or a right tackle, or then you have got Brock Bowers, who can be a tight end, or be a wide receiver, and so they can go from 11 to 12, however they want to do, and then you have to be able to defend them in that same pack. Like, your same personnel has to be able to move with them and grow with them, and that's why they went with Sonny Styles last year against that defense as basically an outside linebacker.
Yeah, and I think if you go back to last year, if you asked who threw the ball more as a percentage of plays, Tennessee or Georgia, everyone in the world is going to say Tennessee, and the answer is Georgia. So, yeah, definitely. I mean, you look at two tight ends and you assume everyone's Iowa, and not everyone is Iowa. Mecca Hanna says, is Caleb Burton okay? As far as I'm aware, Caleb Burton's okay?
Well, Kyle McCord or Devin Brown a couple weeks ago said that Caleb Brown got hurt, and Brown said he heard a pop, but I haven't.
Burton?
Yeah, Caleb Burton.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah.
But I have not. We weren't out here to see anybody, so he wasn't asked about. So don't know.
Okay.
We'll know more Saturday, obviously.
Jordan Kapler says, who's an under-the-radar player you personally would like to have an impact this season?
Well, offensively, I'll just continue to ride the Caleb Brown thing because I think he can do a lot of different things for the offense. Defensively, is can I double dip with Jair Brown again? Like I don't know what kind of impact you're supposed to have as because I'll say third or fourth corner. You probably, if you do have an impact, maybe it's because of injury, which you don't want to hear about. So I don't know. That's you go ahead and talk about it. And I'll see if I can think of something.
Well, is Caden Curry an under the radar player?
Yeah.
It depends on what you mean by under the radar. He really didn't play much last year. Okay, so does he qualify? Do you need to get to someone like Amari Abor or Kenyatta Jackson? They need a fourth defensive end. They've got Jack Sawyer. They've got JT Tuimoloau out. We're kind of assuming Caden Curry's third in line there. So who's the fourth? Whoever the fourth is, whether it's Kenyatta Jackson, Amari Abor, does Joshua Mickens come in and set the world on fire? We'll find out this summer. But
yeah, I know Larry Johnson obviously really liked Kenyatta Jackson's pass rush ability, but he needed to get stronger and bigger, and he has done that. Omari Abor has gotten bigger and stronger and was a guy that we didn't really hear anything about last year, but just he continued to work. He's added like 19 pounds, so interested to see how those two guys do. And they're going to get a bunch of good work against some fresh tackles, some inexperienced tackles, so they have an opportunity to look good, that's for sure.
Christian wants to know the next open practice where we can watch. The first one we're going to be able to watch the whole thing is the scrimmage on Saturday. That's going to be in here, so we'll have a much better sense for a lot of stuff at that point, because we've only been able to watch limited pieces of practice so far.
I've seen no one-on-ones in any
yeah.
aspect, let alone 11 on 11 or 7 on 7.
Yeah. Christian wants to know, what about Sonny Styles? I mean, Sonny Styles is going to be on the field somewhere, and the question is where. And
this is something I asked Jim Knowles about early this spring, or maybe on signing day, when he said spring is going to be a lot of experimentation. And I said, how much of that experimentation is going to involve Sonny Styles? And it's quite a bit, because they have to figure out everything he can do, and then what does he do best, and how does that help the defense, and what ways can they employ him the best, most effective ways to help this defense. And so that's maybe the last 5 practices of spring where you can actually start doing that, because as Ryan Day said, the first 10 is so much just installation, and then last 5 you actually get to start playing, basically.
Yeah. A really good question here. Who has more receptions this year, Cade Stover or the second-year wide receivers? Now, this is a really interesting. Yeah. I saw it. I went, oh man.
You're talking like 35 for Cade Stover.
Yeah. I think. I mean,
30 baseline.
I think high 20s to low 30s, assuming he's healthy for the full season. I think you're looking at high 20s, low 30 for Cade Stover, something like that. And then, I mean, last year the then first-year wide receivers had two receptions. So they're obviously going to have more than that this year, but you've got, I think, a pretty solid top 3 in Marvin Harrison, Emeka Ibuka, Julian Fleming. You've got Jaden Ballard in there, who we're sort of assuming still is the number 4 guy.
Xavier Johnson.
You've got Xavier Johnson in there, who I think is the number 5 guy. I think I'm going with Cade Stover, because you're obviously going to see more production out of them this year than you did last. But that's still, I mean, if you're the, if none of the first-year wide receivers comes in and, jumps over everyone, you're still probably looking at 5th or 6th on the depth chart, depending on injury, depending on all that kind of stuff. I think it would be hard for me to envision, let's say they're the 6th, 7th, and 8th leading wide receivers on Ohio State's team this year. How many catches do the 6th, 7th, and 8th wide receivers on the team have most years? It feels like the answer is like 8, 6, and 5 or something like that. I mean, it just, maybe one of these guys really takes a leap. Maybe someone gets hurt and they get it, they are in a top 4 kind of spot. But
I think you need somebody to get like half of those or 12 of those themselves.
Yeah, and you can only pile up so many against Youngstown State or who's the other MAC team they're playing this year? Kent State.
Doesn't matter.
Spoiler. Do you really think it matters, Eddie? The answer is no.
So the number 6 receiver last year was Jackson Smith and Jigba with 5. And the 7th was Reese Stocksdale with 1.
Yeah, and
eighth was Cam Babb with 1. So
yeah, yeah. There's just when you get beyond the top 4 or 5, there just aren't that many snaps out there because those are not guys who are going to be playing in any games that are close in the fourth quarter unless you have a lot of injuries. And so then you're limited to maybe half the schedule. And in a lot of the games where they are playing, you're at a point where the score is 49-3, and you're not throwing the football a lot anyway. So those are, the fifth and sixth running backs are going to have more carries than the sixth and seventh and eighth wide receivers have in terms of receptions.
So in 2021, when it was Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka, they had together, they were the fifth and sixth, and then Julian Fleming was the seventh. I think so those three were fourth, fifth, and sixth. They combined for 32, and I just you're asking that a lot. And I said, somebody's gonna have to have half of those, and I think you probably need 2 guys with 10 or more to get there. And even then, are the other 2 guys gonna get 10 together? I don't. I'm gonna go with long answer short.
Yes.
Kate Stover.
Mecca Hanna wants to know, have we heard anything about G. Scott? Ryan Day was asked about G. Scott today, and just basically said it's like for him and Joe Royer, it's just a matter of showing that they can do all the things you need to do at tight end. That you've got to be able to line up as an inline tight end, you got to be able to line up off the line, you got to be able to play as if you're an 11 personnel where it's 1 running back, 1 tight end, you've got to be able to block the defensive end. You've got to be able to block the guy coming off the edge. So you got to be able to do that, but you've also got to be able to be in the backfield or play in 12 personnel where you're maybe lined up in a different spot, or you're lined up off the ball, or whatever. You have to be able to do a bunch of different stuff, and it's just a matter of them demonstrating they can do all that kind of stuff to earn that time on the field. Chad Stryker wants to know, have we had a chance to lay eyes on Evan Pryor yet, and how did he look? If so, he is out this spring.
Still out.
So we have, I think, seen him at practice, but it's kind of been just like jogging laps around the field. So, I don't know. Looks like he's in better shape than either of us, but beyond that, I don't think anyone has a real strong opinion. Christian wants to know, how do we feel about recruiting? And, Alex Gleitman just dropped his projected class on the offensive side of the ball, and we'll have Alex on the morning show at some point later on this week to talk about that and kind of go position by position on where things are. He has it projected as, if they get the guys they're going to get, and this is version 1.0 of this, so everything is definitely in stone. Mark it down. Make sure you scream at Alex on Twitter if any of them are wrong. But what are we, 9 months out from early signing day? 9 months out from early signing day with the guys that look like they're realistic possibilities right now. It's like a top 5, top 3 class in the nation on the offensive side of the ball. So that's what you'd expect. But Tony, where's the side of the ball where you kind of have questions?
Well, yeah, exactly. But I also think when you look last year, every year starts out with gosh, they've got a good shot at using their time maybe more wisely, and not necessarily chasing some of the guys that are going to end up just NIL or whatever. So I think maybe I don't know that you hear as much about they're in on all of these top guys. Now they eventually will be in on plenty of them, and again it'll be a top 5 class like it normally is. But I don't see I don't know that you're seeing necessarily, and we'll see Alex's defensive projection, because I just keep going back to the defensive ends last year, where Keon Keeley and Mateo Uiagalelei and Damon Moore, Damon
Wilson.
Damon Wilson, about they're gonna what are they gonna do with all 3 of these guys, and they don't end up with any of them, and so they are more focused in the Midwest, I think, and they're moving forward with that. But I think Ohio State's going to be okay.
Yeah,
that's another long answer short.
Yeah, this is another. We are basically at the equivalent of asking us how the season's going to go after the 3rd spring practice. That's kind of where we are in terms of recruiting right now. It's like, so far, sure, they're in on the guys you would sort of expect them to be in on. surprise. They have a 5-star wide receiver committed. Like, this is just sort of, this is how it goes. They're in on it. You know, there are position groups where there's real significant need this year. They need to get probably 2 running backs. They probably need to get 2 tight ends. They need to get 5 to 6 offensive linemen, and they're in on those
Right.
kind of guys. And
they're making plans for all of that.
yes, and you know, offensive line, which is a position where they've had some misses recently in the last few years. They're in on. They have a very highly touted top 100-ish player from Indiana, Ian Moore, committed already. They've got an in-state tackle, Mark Nave, committed already. They've got a couple, the Deontay and Devontae Armstrong from the Cleveland area. They're heavy favorites to land them. You may maybe add one more from in-state, but you know, and then maybe you're kind of going big game hunting and trying to find that one left tackle somewhere else. But you know, they are certainly on track right now to have a good offensive line class, which is definitely one of the big areas of need. And you just kind of, you know, like wide receiver, quarterback, like it'll be fine. Like it's always fine. It'll be fine.
Yeah, the offensive line, you just got to load up as many as you can, because I don't know if there's a bigger just crapshoot in terms of what you're going to get. You know, they look like they're prospects and they end up being not, and that's nationwide as just a position group.
Speaking of crapshoots, we've got some interesting comments in there. It's Just Me, Tim says, if you had to pick right now, Kyle or Devin, and he wants to know why isn't Kyle McCord the clear favorite?
Because Devin Brown is being given a shot, I think is why Kyle McCord is not the clear favorite. I think Kyle McCord is obviously the betting favorite. And if you go to any sports book, you'll see that. You'll see Kyle McCord as a Heisman candidate and favorite. So I think he is the expected winner, but since neither one of them have started more than one game against Akron in their entire collegiate lives, you're going to keep it an open competition. And if Kyle McCord is clearly the guy, then he should be able to beat out Devin Brown. He should be able to win the job. And so there's really no harm in having this be a wide open competition. That's how you're going to figure out who is the best guy. And you know, they'll start seeing that through the scrimmages. And I like what Ryan Day talked about, what he watches when he watches the quarterbacks. He watches what they're watching, what they're seeing, and where their feet are, and just watching it from the quarterback's eyes. But yeah, at this point, Kyle McCord, I think people expect him to be fine, but if he's the guy, he should be able to beat out a redshirt freshman.
He should. You've got a year of head start, and with as much as Ryan Day talked today about how you kind of, you can watch him in practice all you want, you can watch him in scrimmages all you want, you can watch him in the spring game all you want. You don't really know what you have until the lights come on and you're doing it for real. And Kyle McCord has done that once, and it was 2 years ago, and it was against Akron. But as a true freshman who's coming in and really kind of thrown into the fire, he did fine. And so, you handle that 2 years ago, and yeah, you're doing it on junior varsity difficulty because you're playing Akron.
But he did beat out Jack Miller.
He did beat out Jack Miller, and he has not given you any reason to think that he won't be able to do it.
Yeah.
And so, we'll see. There's obviously a lot of practice to go between now and then, but Ryan Day talked on Tuesday about how a lot of this comes down to you have to find their extraordinary ability and look at what their extraordinary ability is. And with Kyle McCord, I think that's probably somewhat leadership and that kind of stuff, but also he's a good thrower. He spent another year in the program. He's kind of got a little bit of a head start there. With Devin Brown, it's maybe a little bit more running, and then you got to kind of balance those two different skill sets.
Yeah. Let's see. How many more questions do we have? Is it time to let's see? Because they've been coming in.
What Christian wants to know: what last year freshman redshirted?
Oh gosh, it's probably easier to tell you which freshman didn't redshirt. And it was Dallin Hayden and
Sonny Styles,
CJ
Hicks,
Jair Brown.
I think Caden Curry played more than 4 games.
Did.
I'm just thinking about guys who played on special teams.
Yeah,
that's basically what it was. Who played on special teams last year?
Pretty much everybody. Like Tager Shabola was a backup, was the number 2 left guard, but he still only played in 3 or 4 games, so he redshirted. Like the vast majority of the true freshmen redshirted. So none of the freshman receivers. Was there a freshman tight end, Bennett Christian? He redshirted. So I think We may have missed one.
Yeah,
but
virtually everyone redshirted. Assume that someone redshirted unless you hear otherwise. Christian Person wants to know about C.J. Hicks and Kai Stokes. That's kind of the,
I think Kai Stokes right now is your number 2 free safety behind Lathan Ransom. Although, again, we have not seen where Lathan Ransom actually is.
Yeah.
And nor have we seen where Kai Stokes is. C.J. Hicks is going to be behind Steel Chambers as your number 2 will. Reed Carrico has played some will, even though Jim Knowles talked about him moving around. They've got to find a place to put C.J. Hicks, but also C.J. Hicks has to show that he belongs on the field. That has to happen before they're going to worry about, what are we going to do about C.J. Hicks? Well, first, he's got to show us that he needs to be on the field, kind of like Sonny Styles did last year. And it's like, well, okay, now that he needs to be here, we need to find a place for him. And I don't know that they're at that point yet with C.J. Hicks, even though there was some mention of the jack position, which they're not really going to do this spring. So, I think he's up in the air right now.
Well, and both of those guys are kind of in spots where I think they're intriguing prospects, but they have enough people ahead of them where there's not a real clear path to field. There's not a vacant job necessarily at either of those spots. Any of the safety spots, really. You've got, I'm kind of treating Jihad Carter as if he's something of an incumbent starter. If you're coming in as a, multi-year starter at Syracuse, they probably are feeling pretty good about his preparation to play. You've got Lathan Ransom back. You've got Josh Proctor back. You've got, we'll see how Court Williams progresses this year and if he fits in there anywhere. But you have enough bodies back there that there is not a clear path of the field. And linebacker, obviously, you got both starters back. You've got Cody Simon back. So there's not a clear path of the field either. So you got to fight your way up that depth chart one rung at a time.
Yeah, and I say he's the number 2 will, but he's not, because Cody Simon is the number 2 Mike, the number 2 will. Although this spring, Cody Simon's likely the number 1 Mike with no Tommy Eichenberg out there.
Yep. Real quickly, if you guys are watching and can hit that thumbs up button, that would help us. That helps us work the magical YouTube algorithm. I don't understand it either, but that's what they tell me. So there we go. Go ahead and do that for us. We'll run through, see if we got any other real quick ones before we wrap things up.
I know behind us earlier when we started, it was C.J. Stroud and some receivers getting ready for a pro day tomorrow, including Marvin Harrison, including Jackson Smith and Jigba. Although Marvin Harrison will not be going pro just yet, he will be participating tomorrow for the for his quarterback, and maybe the NFL may notice him as well.
And last year C.J. Stroud was part of the pro day for Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson. So it's just a chance to you go through the thing, you sort of see it's like a little dry
really
run, just to sort of get you ready, and then hey, the scouts. Guess what? The scouts might pay some attention to the guy who's also doing the thing. Marvin Harrison, quite possibly a future NFL player of some sort.
Imagine an NFL scout is here next year at the pro day. He's like, I saw that Marvin Harrison kid last year.
Oh, I
remember him.
He's got to be like 40. I remember him playing for the Colts like 20 years ago. He can't be draft eligible anymore. Jordan wants to know what's the quarterback order. If you ask anyone in the building, they will tell you, we don't know. It's way too early. So, I don't think I have any real significant additional data that I didn't have 2 months ago. So I will stick with what I said 2 months ago. It's probably slightly more likely to be Kyle McCord, just based on he's had another year in the system. He's maybe maybe if you ask people, he's maybe a little bit of a better passer, and Brown's a little bit of a better runner. I think, if it's a tiebreaker, probably the better passer wins out. If it's a tiebreaker, probably the guy who's got another year of seniority wins out. So, what do you want to say, 55-45?
Yeah.
Right, Kyle McCord right now?
We haven't seen enough to come off of that and to move Devin Brown up. And we may see a lot from Devin Brown, but may also see more from Kyle McCord as well. Sure. That's what you're expecting. So no reason right now to change anything based on that early assumption.
And what we get to see on Saturday is not going to be the final answer on all of that. Jordan wants to know, between the three of us, who's the starter? You, me, or Kevin? Who's on the bench filling water bottles, and why is it Kevin?
Well, are you going to trust Kevin with the water bottles? I mean, you need water to survive. Can he just go pick up the black pellets off of the ground? It's like, but these are like sands on the beach.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. They are.
Like black pellets on the football field, so are the days of our lives.
Just go count them.
I'm a lefty, so I guess I don't know.
Nobody wants a lefty quarterback.
Yeah, it always looks. I don't know what it is about it. It's like the opposite of a lefty baseball player. Like,
Right,
lefty
yeah.
baseball players always look awesome
looks-
swinging,
yeah.
and lefty quarterbacks always look kind of weird and disjointed.
Oh,
and
you poor
fl-
thing.
You always look weird.
Have you ever seen the pictures where they invert, like they take your eyelids and like invert them, and people look like really crazy, like they're really disturbing? It's like that's what lefty quarterbacks are. You've got the inverted eyelids. The bottom eyelids are on the top eyelids are on the bottom. It's just
I was
no,
real-
it's not inside out.
I was very confused as to
No.
what you meant by invert.
Yeah. It's not inside out. It's not like, gross. It's still pretty gross. It's top eyelids on the bottom, and it's lefty quarterbacks.
Lefty
Other than Steve Young.
Lefty quarterbacks, basically the Clockwork Orange of college football.
The arm is propped up with toothpicks. Anything else? Have we defeated?
I think we've gone through pretty much all the questions in here. Yes, I think we've gone through everything here. So, yep.
Okay.
So we will be back on Thursday in some form with something. We'll be talking to offensive linemen and defensive linemen, and then Saturday the scrimmage should be a very interesting week and a fun week at BuckeyeHuddle.com.
Yeah, a lot of information coming forward just this week, so it's really good. You get the baseline to start out, and now we just the fire hose, drinking through a fire hose this next week, which is always a fun time during spring. So I want to thank you all for joining us. As always, check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Become a member, say hello to us there, and also continue to find us at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Thank you all, and we'll talk to you guys later.